All right, so today we're here to spend 60 to 90 minutes talking about a new service that we've released collectively with Information Logistics, our partner here, and John and I will tag team this presentation. The service, which we did a press release on in early June, is called HELP, Highway Emergency Link Platform. I hope, as you'll notice, it's a new novel service that was first originated with Information Logistics and the agencies in Pennsylvania DOT, Pennsylvania Turnpike principally. And we are proud to be able to collectively make this available to everybody here. I'm trying to get my next slide. Let's see. Okay, slide 2. I assume folks can see that. So the topics here, we'll really quickly review INRIX Information Logistics. I think many of you probably are on this call because you received emails from us. Probably know most about us. I think many of you know about Information Logistics, but we'll let John present a couple of slides. So if you didn't, you will. And then we'll focus on the help platform and service, both what we're trying to address and how it actually works, along with the demo and, of course, Q&A at the end until we exhaust all time or all questions. Okay, INRIX. I have a couple slides here on INRIX. Won't spend much time here. I think most folks generally know what we do. We've been in existence since 2005. Big data company. We are involved in supplying traffic data and services, parking data and services, analytics, and then we have an in-vehicle component we call OpenCar. We support customers in the automotive industry, public sector, and enterprise, which is a broad range of services from fleets to media, financial companies, real estate agencies, enterprises, etc. We're live in 45 countries. The service we'll talk about here today is live and ready for use in the US. And that has to do more with the government and the services that we leverage, not our ability to provide the services in other countries. I won't spend much time here, but we've been providing services to government agencies in the US for over a decade. Most states in one form or another, and many MPOs and cities are customers of ours, whether it's real-time data, historical data, analytics. We also supply the national data sets that's used for congestion reporting through the feds, called NPM RDS. And in fact, on July 1st, we'll reach a milestone of we will have been providing data to several states in the I-95 Corridor Coalition under what's called the Vehicle Probe Project for a decade, starting July 1. So we're the first ones to do that in America, and we now have a decade of experience on statewide data provision as of, Sunday. I'll turn it over to John. I'll give a little overview of Information Logistics, then we can dive into the content.
Yeah, thanks, Rick. So Information Logistics, we are a company based in New Jersey, just outside of Philadelphia. The company itself has been around for a little over 20 years now, actually. And really what we focus in is in the transportation world. We do a lot of different things in terms of developing some customized programs and things like that, but mostly we're a traveler information company, whether that's with 511, with solutions here like we're talking about with Help, mobile apps, all kinds of fun things. So we have our products that we like to bring around, and then we also put a lot of customized solutions together, sometimes for a general DOT purpose, like just getting traveler info. Other times it's for toll roads, like a toll calculator or things of that nature. We have a small team here, but it's a very talented group of programmers and designers, and a couple of us people that do things like webinars. And Rick, if you'll hit the next slide real quick. It's just kind of we have a few places up here where we're working across the U.S. We have a pretty good division of states here, and we actually do a little bit of work in England as well. So we've seen a bunch of different types of environments, be they rural or urban or suburban, and we've definitely seen some things that work in all, and many things that need to be customized for each kind of environment. And I'll leave it at that. Thanks, Rick.
Great. And we've been working with Information Logistics for about 6, 7 years now as it relates to 511 services, specifically 511 in Pennsylvania. Great company. Love working with them. Great job servicing their customers. Okay, so the service that we're bringing together is, again, I'll talk about a little more in depth about the service that's live in Pennsylvania. Let's give some background. It's really focused on an area that, if you've read Nicholas Taleb's books, The Black Swan, it's kind of the black swan in our business and in the TISMO world. And that's kind of the low occurrence, high impact events. Things that don't happen very often, nearly impossible to plan for, almost never the same, and always have unique circumstances, but have major consequences, a lot of safety related issues, and also oftentimes draw media attention, scrutiny, executive office, governor's office, etc. And so what we have here is a service today that can really help as a game changer related to addressing these unexpected major events that cause blockages, road closures, what have you. Tend to be, these things tend to be more on the higher speed roads in rural and remote areas. And again, safety, whether it's immediate accidents or being stuck, trapped, out isolated for hours. This is the area that the service, the sweet spot the service targets. That's been a gap in our ITS capabilities up until now. There's lots of potential other applications depending on the location and the creativity of the agency involved and the need. Things, maybe there are expected events, major festivals that lead to some kind of unexpected consequence. Oftentimes there are festivals in rural areas that end up with backups. Backups lead to accidents. Accidents lead to trapped queues, et cetera, et cetera. And all of a sudden you got a problem on your hand. Major planned closures or events, perhaps wide area evacuations. I live in Florida, and we've just had a massive evacuation last fall for Hurricane Irma that I could see having this service in the right places and uses would have been very useful to communicate to folks about where to go or where not to go as they're evacuating. Wide area impacts like flooding, and then some other instances where there might be planned closures, but they're in very isolated locations. A pass that's closed, a bridge that's out that requires 100 miles travel or a turnaround if you don't get the right information at the right time. And again, low occurrence, high impact events where queues are trapped or warnings are needed. And right now, currently, we don't have the ability to communicate to folks very easily. I'm going to step through a bunch of pictures and images and some kind of news articles. Obviously, winter weather is a clear situation and scenario where bad things happen in places you don't expect and require responses that are kind of outsized. You'll see a number of these winter weather examples. They're not the only things. One thing I've learned, providing live data at INRIX for over a decade now, is there's something crazy happening just about everywhere, or just about anywhere at any given time in the U.S. Something crazy is happening. It's not necessarily tied to weather, or certainly just winter weather. All kinds of funky things happen in places you least expect them. Here's an instance of ice on the road in Kansas. We did in April, I was pulling together a presentation, and the next couple of slides just came from some web scans in a week in April. And high winds in Colorado, flipped the truck, closed an interstate. High winds in New Hampshire, flipped the truck, closed an interstate. Almost the same day, a couple thousand miles apart. And at the same time, something tipped over a truck in the middle of Kentucky. Doesn't look like it's bad weather or anything like that. But again, just to prove things can happen. Here's a screenshot from years ago. I think we have some folks from TDOT on a call. This was a noteworthy incident in the evolution of operations within Tennessee, an incident around Bonnaroo that has led to a lot of effort within Tennessee around protecting the queue as one of those contributing factors to realize the concept of protecting the queue. Again, this was tied to a backup and an exit that doesn't typically handle the kind of traffic that it gets. Sometimes you have things in Indiana, it'll be 3 summers ago now. A contractor was working on the interstate and they sunk the bridge and they had to close the bridge for a month. And necessitated a major diversion route with almost no notice that they had to operate for a month. Here's examples, again, across time, different types of incidents and different parts of the country. This is ice in Pennsylvania. Here's heavy fog in Tennessee. Again, almost 25. This was particularly noteworthy when I scanned for this. There's almost 25 years to the day of a major fog event in Tennessee. And again, folks in TDOT on the call probably remember both of these incidents. But fog is another one. Flooding, it doesn't often happen on interstates, but it happens. Here's in West Virginia, and that same week in April. Mudslides, California. Fires. This is in Florida on I-95. A few years ago in Washington State, up near the Canadian border, a truck ran into a bridge and basically shut down I-5, both directions of travel for extended period. Here's a work zone related event in Wisconsin. Again, that same week in April, truck decided that it was going to take a new route and it didn't make it very far. So these are examples. And again, the point being here for those on the call, and I think a lot of you, could be a self-selected group. You're probably saying, why are you telling me this? I know these things. But one of the things I like to point out is when you go on Google and you search hundreds trapped on interstate, you hit images and you see just the diversity. This is the first set of images on the first screen, and there's winter weather, but it's not just winter weather. There's all kinds of things that happen, and if you clicked on the links, they'd be all over America, et cetera, et cetera. A couple miles from my house on Monday, and we're focused mostly on the rural or the more remote areas. There may also be uses, and there's some new movements with some rulemaking with the FCC that might make it even more practical to use what we're talking about here in urban areas. But this was an example just a couple miles from my house here, just north of Orlando. I-4, which is undergoing construction, had a gas leak, and you can see here vehicles both diverted and trapped in queues. In Pennsilvania, we actually pulled a screenshot. I've got a couple screenshots here coming that have some INRIX probe data in them of trajectories, so you can kind of see what the data that the probes we use to determine traffic in real time, just how obvious some of these situations and scenarios are when you look at the probe data. So here's an instance in Pennsylvania in early March. There were several events near each other at the same time due to weather, and one particular one along I-80 in kind of east central Pennsylvania near the Poconos. That's the road there. Eastbound, what you're seeing here is essentially a vehicle trajectory plot lined up about as close as I can make it to the road network itself. There's the east-west highway. This kind of makes it a little easier. What you see here is those dots and lines. Those lines are actually vehicles moving through the network. And as they move up on the y-axis, that's moving across from left to right in time. And the lines and the dots are kind of the instantaneous speed and the travel time between the GPS reports we have from each vehicle. So you can see kind of the extent of this particular event. And I'll show you in a second just how long and just how many miles this is. But you can see very clearly a few things where you have the black vertical dots. Those are trucks that are basically, they have a lot of, they can stay powered up where a lot of passenger vehicles will turn themselves off. And so when you see gaps in the data, that can mean a trapped queue. When you see the dots on the truck, or the dots moving vertical, that's a vehicle that's not moving, essentially reporting the same location it's on, and trucks with the more infinite power, if you will, will continue to stay on and report and so forth. And so you've got both backs of queues, trapped queues, illustrations. This is, and on the top side of the screen is the traffic going westbound from right to left. And basically just invert the picture. So vehicles are moving right to left and time is still going up. This particular instance was problem lasted across this region for about 24 hours, and it's about 40 miles long. And so obviously both the ability to deal with that and scale and the ability to communicate with people, maybe to avoid that, are both important things in a TSMO environment that we'd like to be able to accomplish. Well, final kind of thing here in examples is this actually is in Missouri this winter, and this February, and a scale of, it made national news that the I-44 had ice on it. And the reason I just show this is that we basically were able to pick up 5 different instances of a major queue, of a trapped queue or a backup or what have you, 2 in the eastbound direction. So this is going from basically left to right. Left side is the Oklahoma state line, and the right side was I-270, which is in St. Louis area. And you kind of see here, starting around 4 p.m. local time, a little before 4 p.m. local time, 2 different places, hundreds of miles, 100 miles apart. There were queues of significant size and duration, and one of them lasted for, along the lines of 12 hours. So we had 3 events in this direction. There's another one over to the right. I have my screen partially blocked. And then coming westbound, so flip the direction of travel. This would actually be going from St. Louis. I didn't flip it on this slide, but imagine St. Louis on your left and Oklahoma state line on your right. A couple other instances that you had queues and slowdowns and blockages and the like. Together, so simultaneously on one road, one state DOT was dealing with 5 events. And you can see here the scale of these, the duration, the maximum queue length, et cetera, et cetera. So obviously very overwhelming, and in all cases in areas that were not easily accessible by typical media. So we think about this, and we'll kind of pivot to the solution side here. You've got, when we think about an incident or an event, as vehicles are approaching those events, when they're far enough away, ideally we want to give them information to move them away from an event, take them out of harm's way, reduce the possibility of secondaries or tertiary accidents, and so forth. And when they get closer, we need to be able, in an ideal world, communicate with them that danger is ahead and imminent. There's probably maybe not much they can do about it, other than knowing it's coming and be alert and be ready. They may already be in a situation where they're going to be trapped, or they're going to have to incur a backup queue. We'd like them to do that safely. And then there's obviously folks that are in the queue that have been trapped. Something's happened in front of them. Something's either happened behind them, or they're in a geographical location where you can't turn around, and are there until something gets cleared, or people can reverse, or the weather clears, or what have you, and then the ability to communicate to folks in those queues become important. So what we're addressing here with help is, in the service, is the ability to monitor all major roads in real time, leveraging INRIX probe data, and then the ability to communicate with, we'd say all travelers, but it's really most travelers. We'll explain that in a second. But the percentage of drivers, travelers you're able to reach far exceeds any other approach that we can do with kind of traditional traveler information, emergency communications methods. Focus, this service, that kind of the core sweet spot is the ability to address and treat and communicate with people in trapped queues. That's providing official information on updates along the way, so folks know that the agencies are aware and the agencies are addressing things and sharing information about what's going on. An important, unique offering with the help service is a two-way communication that John will demonstrate. And then obviously some of these incidents last for hours, if not a day or more. The ability to provide ongoing updates to those that are trapped in those queues. As we talked about, increasingly the potential to address travelers, again, still in these remote areas where we don't have very good means of warning folks today, but to be able to use the help service to warn travelers that are approaching trap queues, closures, detours, things that are of danger to them, and situations where they could be adding danger to the situation, and do that in a way that gives them some information, provides milepost references about where they should be on the lookout, and so on and so forth. And then possibly, as we discussed, approaching planned closures, major work zones, if you know things are going to be dicey, the ability to communicate with folks that are approaching or near that area. Like many of you, I've been involved in the travel information side of this business for decades, and there's lots of different tools we have in the toolbox, and we think that the help service is a really important one, focused on, again, on these black swans, these isolated locations, these events you can't plan for. And the reason is they fill a gap. We've got a lot of agency approaches that broadcast information to folks, but the reality is they either have low penetration 511 services. Some folks know about them. Most folks don't, or don't have them on. Twitter, same thing. If you don't necessarily know where to look, you might not get that message. Agencies have all sorts of special purpose sites and apps and so forth for unique situations. There's an example, Washington State, mountain passes are a big deal. So the status of those passes, if you know where to look, you can find that information. If you don't, you could be riding blind. Work zones, folks have work zone information systems. They have special sites and apps and so forth for major work zones. But again, low penetration, you've got to know where to find them. We've got a proliferation of private services. Waze is obviously one on top of everyone's mind. That they tend to be used more for congestion avoidance, and even that relatively, in a sense, these are still relatively low penetration actual use. The likelihood of having significant percentage of vehicles driving towards or in a queue, having the ability to get information through these services, know they can get them, isn't necessarily high. Plus, you still have to have coordination between public and private sector to get the right messages to the right folks. Work zones, a lot of you have major work zones and you do a lot of things around those work zones, maintenance of traffic, information systems, and great. We know several cases where the queues get back even before the start of the work zone signing. And so you've planned for a work zone, but the danger point is far in advance of those signs. And to a driver approaching, they're unaware because they haven't hit the part of the system that has all the warnings and the maintenance of traffic around the work zone. Dynamic message signs are awesome, and in a way, the service, at least the broadcast part of the help service, can be considered a virtual dynamic message sign. But the DMS suffer from, you get most people, as long as they're paying attention, most people will read the sign as they go underneath it, but you don't have signs everywhere. So it's high penetration, but low likelihood to be anywhere near a situation where problems exist. I mean, if there are some cases, a lot of folks, again, in fog-related areas and stuff might have put up signs, or some of the areas that tend to be have more repeatable offenders related to weather. But by and large, again, if something random happens somewhere random on the network, there's no message sign nearby to assist. And again, all of these, I'll use the word suffer. Twitter is not necessarily this way, but nearly all of these are one-way communication where an agency broadcasts. Even if you do get a message, you do not have the ability to have two-way communication readily with individuals. So as we pivot from the need, again, I think most of you are well aware of this. Otherwise, you would not have agreed to spend, an hour and a half on the phone with us. But what we are taking advantage of to meet this need is some systems that FEMA and along with FCC rulemaking have helped create for us. You're going to hear a couple of phrases. You may hear a couple of phrases that John will use. One is IPAWS, which is the system, the overall system of sharing messages that created by agencies and sharing them through the means of emergency communications. And then the emergency alerting system, and the focus here is wireless emergency alerts. And Pennsylvania is the first to create a system. Information Logistics built it for them, and that's what we're bringing to the table today. Wireless alerts, you get them occasionally. If you have an iPhone, if you have a screen, as long as you don't turn off emergency alerts. This is why it's not necessarily 100%. But the predominant number of folks, the default in an iPhone is on. I have an iPhone. I assume in an Android it's the same thing. And what we'll talk about here is considered a class of an emergency alert. We've seen them on our phones. We've gotten them. Amber alerts, they manifest themselves the same way, where what essentially happens is a voluntary system where the carriers have agreed with an agency that has credentials, basically geolocates identifies a polygon area to send the message, and depending on the agency and the nature of it, it can be a weather alert, flooding alert, different kind of weather alert, amber alerts, all different kinds of categories of alerts that can be communicated, and it's a system that does not use typical media. It overrides everything, and it goes beep, 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 makes that annoying sound, and it provides the message. That's the service, that's the fundamental transmission service that we are leveraging with HELP. And importantly, I've got kind of in this mashup screen here in the lower right, the FCC has actually adopted some new rules in early 2018 that will, by late 2019, require the carriers who are all participating in this to be able to have a more precise target of when a polygon gets drawn, who gets the messages. You can see here a 1/10 of a mile overshoot. So now types of things like Q warning and the like become much more plausible in more parts of the country, as folks that aren't necessarily driving on the road, there'll be the potential to have fewer and fewer folks alerted that are not part of the road network. Will be essentially that will go away as we move into 2019. So that's a really positive development for the impact of the HELP service. So I have a couple more slides, and I'll hand it over to John. And these slides I've actually extracted from our friends and colleagues in Pennsylvania. Just a couple of weeks ago at ITS America, Mike Pack and Mark Kopko gave a nice 15-minute summary of the service that's called 511 PA Connect. And that is what we have essentially joined forces, INRIX and Information Logistics, white labeled the service HELP, and now make it available to all agencies nationwide. So if you like what you've heard or seen in Pennsylvania, we are now making this available across the rest of the U.S. So they branded it, by the way, just so you know, 511, again, with somebody that both was involved in helping create 511 and then spent a lot of time with folks across the country. 511 is a brand, depending on the state, is a brand you embrace or a brand you avoid. And so in some cases, agencies would want to brand, may want to brand this along with the 511 service, and that was certainly the case in Pennsylvania. The service we'll talk about is branded 511 PA Connect. And again, it's the first of its kind. And the focus was Trapped Traveler emergency communications tool. Any of you have been in Pennsylvania, you know that all of those images we showed, all those different ways occur with seeming with quite a bit of frequency. The nature, the topography of the state, a lot of remote areas, a lot of hills, a lot of microclimates, and just a lot of craziness that goes on there that lead to a lot of situations. And so, they're a microcosm of the country as a whole. and the agencies moved in the beginning of or late 2016 to introduce the service. Again, key features, no, it doesn't require an app. Everybody, as long as you haven't turned off your emergency alert, will get the messages. It's a push message, and it allows for both broadcast communications and then communications back from the agency. John will explain more when I hand it over to him, but it allows for both kind of broadcast information in a precise way to those trapped in the queue or maybe approaching the queue or another area that you want to inform folks, and just generally gives a better picture of what's happening, allows the agencies to communicate with those trapped. It gives overall clearer picture as well. This stuff was not taken lightly. It wasn't introduced as a, hey, let's try it and see what we think. The agencies worked collaboratively, and you see here, before it went live in December 2016, Pennsylvania DOT, Pennsylvania Turnpike, the state police, and the State Emergency Management Association got together and created an operating procedure. John will go a little more in depth in this, but that you see here on the right is essentially the procedure that was created before the service was established, and importantly, kind of in the top middle row there, when there's an anticipated trap queue of 4 hours or more is when the service gets invoked in that approach. Now, there's been some evolution with some lessons learned and a few other applications that occur as well, but it's a very coordinated system working with the agencies involved in the state of Pennsylvania. It went live in late 2016, December 2016. Many of you listened to Mark Kopko. He'll tell you that they were actually doing acceptance testing that day, and there was a major incident, and they said, let's try it and see how it works. And so for the first day of service, they generated a positive outcome for those in the state that were in danger, trapped in a queue, etc. Received all sorts of awards, and those of us that have been trying to do statewide things for years, I think look at this and go, wow, this is why we do this. And so it's quite an achievement. And as this was presented, we quickly started to work with information logistics to see how we can bring it forward. I think an important thing to note, this is a big tool in their toolbox for major events, kind of events that the governor gets involved in. The governor launched the service. The governor, in one of those nor'easter storms that came in March, at least one that I know of, as part of the ongoing communication about PennDOT and state response to the weather event, were ongoing statistics about how 501 Connect is being used and so forth. So we announced on June 6th, we announced HELP, Highway Emergency Link Platform, that is available across the entire country. And the focus is trapped queue communications and travel information. And the goals here are save lives, better manage road incidents. And the reality is now, as these services become available, the notion of doing everything an agency can do once one of these things happened. For those of you that are in joint and several liability states, the need, the ability to demonstrate that you are serving when these incidents happen, that you're doing everything you can to respond to them, to mitigate damage, fatalities, etc., will become increasingly important. A lot of this has been said, and I may actually won't spend a lot of time here. The important thing, though, about HELP, again, very similar. It's essentially the same service as 501 PA Connect. No app needed. It will start as one-way communication. John will show how it becomes two-way communication, pushes official messages to specifically targeted areas, and the system is designed. It's already essentially pre-approved, if you will. It fits the FEMA IPAWS protocols, formats, and allows messages to be injected fairly quickly into the emergency alerting system service. And there's lots of different forms of the service that get utilized. The ability, you send out an alert, people can respond back, and then information can be exchanged in a myriad of ways once somebody engages that's trapped in a queue or needs more information. So I will finish my part with, I think we have some folks from Iowa on the call. This is, these happen a lot. You don't often get these on video or agencies willing to share, so we really appreciate Iowa here. This was an instance on I-35 north of Des Moines near Ames, where this is a secondary incident and a trapped queue. This made the news cycle in some of the weather here, and just shows you again the ability, if we're able to, warn people ahead of something that that they're coming into this area, they may be able to slow down and avoid it. And two, once they're in this, depending on how isolated this key, it could be hours before folks are actually getting the services they need, or even communicated with officially. And so these are the things that we're looking to help. In this particular case, you can see there are 50 to 70 vehicles, a fatality, about 5 miles of stopped traffic, and stranded motorists had to be bused from the scene. So we know that this happens with more frequency. It doesn't always make national news, but as those of you know, these are the things that keep a lot of us up at night that are in TSM&O. And with that, I'm going to turn over to John, who I'm going to actually change present. John, you want me to change the presenter or to you, and you pick up the slides?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, that's good. Thanks.
Okay, so I'm going to change to you. That way you can run the demo. We'll see here.
Can you see my screen yet?
Yes.
Perfect. Well, hey, thanks, Rick. I really appreciate you putting such a good groundwork down for this. This makes the demo part pretty smooth. You took all the acronym explanation out of it, so I can talk straight in acronyms now, which for my military background feels really nice, so thank you. Rather than just telling you more about the system at this point, we thought when Rick and I were talking about planning this, that we thought it'd be more fun if you actually got to try and experience it a little bit. So rather than tell you to put your phones away and only pay attention to the sound of my voice, what I actually want you to do is take your phones out. And I'd like you to visit the website that's listed on the screen, that i2helpdemo.com. And because what we're going to do now is we're going to set the scene a little bit. So imagine you're on a limited access highway and you're sitting there and not much is happening. And all of a sudden you get that lovely annoying sound on your phone. Hopefully that was sufficiently annoying for everybody. And you're going to get that message on the screen like you see on the right. And it's going to say something like that. And it'll probably tell you a little bit more about the closure, saying that, there's a closure on, this road between these two exits. And it's going to tell you to go to that website. And when you go to that website, you're going to have some instructions there about how to go and register for the event. And for as many of you that can right now, I'd love for you to go register so you can actually see what the back and forth is like. Now, one of the critical things in putting this part of the site together was that we don't get to go and train the public. And that's really important, that you have a simple user interface for that side so that the agency can get the data and the interaction it needs, but you don't have to go on a huge public awareness campaign except to make sure people know it's not spam. Now, the other nice part about this is when you're using a system like the emergency alerting system, people kind of already know that it's a legitimate alert coming through. You've kind of got a little credentialing going behind you, so it's really nice. So I'm just going to leave this on the screen for one more second so I can give people time to see that website again. And the other thing I want people to look at, as you're registering, there's also a button on there for Google Translate. And I'm not particularly good at other languages, but I've tested this on several people that are. And it does a relatively good job of getting the point across. But the part that's really nice is, even though the web page you're looking at on that registration page is completely dynamically created, we've made it interact with the Google Translate so that all of the buttons and everything will flip over, so that you can really still walk through it, even if it's not in the clearest, most elegant form of the language that you're looking at it from. So, okay, hopefully everybody has gone to i2helpdemo.com now and registered. And in a minute, I'm going to see how many of you made it. But what I'm going to do is, that's what the people on the road are seeing. What I'm going to transition to now is to see what the agency had to do to make that actually happen and make that all come on the screen. So we have this process for setting up the event. And it really is just a few easy clicks. And that simplicity, again, is key. Basically, the operator just needs to enter the fields you see on the screen, and they're not as hard as they look. The couple that are really, really important is this WIA message title, which is going to be the title on the web page. It's going to be the title for the IVR system that's created for it. But more importantly, it's going to be the body of that message that comes out on the wireless emergency alert. So as you see here, for the example we have, it says something like this: major closure in progress on this road between point A and B in the direction. And if you look at the end of it, there's a message with the instructions that are automatically appended to it. Now, there is a character limit on this, so we've already restricted it, so you only get the number of characters that are subtracted from the automatically appended part. So it's really straightforward. You know, a person in a TMC might be doing 16 other things while this is going on. We wanted this to be something they could log into, have gotten a very small amount of training on, and be able to launch it. So they can type their message, they say it's going to go out to the WIA, they get their description, which is really for the website, and they're going to need to get this latitude and longitude, but that's not something that you're actually going to be typing in numbers for. It's a clickable map interface on the screen, and I'm going to get more into that part in a minute, because you can see some of the ways that's nice and easy. You make sure your status is open, say how long you want your iPause alert, and save. Now, that's pretty straightforward, I think, on the administrator end here in terms of the interface. Now, that's doing a lot of things on the back end, and that was kind of a nightmare for the programmers because the simplest interfaces usually have the most complicated back ends. The good news is, for those of you that are on the call, you don't have to worry about that because the programmers here already sweated out, gritted their teeth, and maybe said a few bad words in the process, but they got the job done, and it all interacts with a bunch of different systems. So when you do that save button and you activate that event, you've turned on a text messaging system that works two ways. You've turned on an IVR system that can work in two ways if you so choose. PennDOT did not choose to, but it can. It's one way for PennDOT right now. And it also created a website on the fly, and that's that website that you saw that you registered for, where you did your registration. That's all created when you press the save button. So it's really kind of a nice way to just get in there quickly and simply and get the job done without having to spend too much brain power or resources on it. Now, I told you I'd talk more about the drawing, and on the bottom right picture, you can see the end result. What the agency is going to do is, all they have to do on the map is click these different points, every vertex they want on there, and just make sure it connects as a shape. And they can go roughly along the road, but you know they want to tend to get more rather than less as they're going through here, so they can make sure you catch the people in the traffic queue. The part that's really interesting about this, the whole INRIX side of this house, is that INRIX makes it really easy for you to figure out what kind of shape you should draw. So Rick made a point earlier where he said that something crazy is always happening around the US at any given time. Well, his point was really nicely reinforced this morning, because about 4 a.m. we got a notification that an alert was going off, and Pennsylvania got one all queued up, yeah, no pun intended, and they were all ready to go. And fortunately, they were able to clear the queue within 4 hours. They didn't have to activate it, but they had it in the system. And so what we did was we were able to take a couple screenshots at the time, and in the top left, this is the INRIX data that's actually showing you the length of the trapped queue as it's known at that point in the data. And what they were able to do was take it, and you can see the checkered part in here as they zoomed out. They drew it around the head, a little bit further in front of it, and then they pushed it a lot further back because it was a westbound accident. So they were able to use the information from the INRIX data, not just the regular traffic data that you see on the screen, which is also really nice and helpful to find some of these other problems. But with the queue data, they could actually make sure they encompassed the queue as it stood there, because they don't always have cameras at every point. I mean, how often does the problem come in a place where you actually have the camera on it? You know, I think that's part of the reason the Iowa video is such a rarity, is because it's not usually where you really want it for that problem. But with the INRIX data, you have a lot more eyes in there. So you can push it back, and then you push it even further back than the INRIX data was indicating, so that you're also getting the cars approaching. Because you're going to expect, if it's going to be several hours till the queue clears, that you're going to have a lot more cars stacking up there, and it's just going to keep building and building, and you don't want to leave those people out of the communication side. The other part that I'll talk about in a minute is you can actually do a second alert once you have the queue in kind of a fixed position to warn people of the upcoming queue and say, hey, there's something ahead, you should avoid the area. And I'll talk about how the Pennsylvania Turnpike had to do that on an unfortunate Friday evening as they were getting ready for some Jersey Shore traffic back last year. So as I move on to the next slide, I'm really going to actually switch out of this, and we're going to take a live look in. And what we're going to do is we're going to jump into the event that I had created for this that hopefully we had a few registrants for. Now, the first thing I want to point out on this is that I made this event centric around my office so that you could see a couple of GPS points on here, because it's going to take your live GPS location. So some of you that are in farther parts of the country, if I see a no there, that means I do know your location. I don't know who this is, but I'm going to click on their location, and I can see that they're probably pretty far out from where I want to be right now. But that's okay, because I'll go to one of the numbers I know is in that queue, and I can get right back to where I was. So there's my area. I've got some that are in, some are in or near. People may have moved at some point, but I'm going to pretend I have this trapped queue right outside my office here in New Jersey. And I want to make sure you see some of the interesting things on here. So right now, since there's no actual trapped queue, I don't have that nice trapped queue definition from INRIX, but I do have the live traffic from INRIX going through all these routes here, which is kind of fantastic. What we also have down here, if I scroll this down just a little bit, I have a bunch of different layers on here, and now I'm doing this in Jersey with Pennsylvania layers on here just for demonstration, but I can pull on basically anything you can put on a 511 site or an ATMS site, any kind of data layer we can pull on here to supplement the information. So if you need to know that there's mile markers there, if you want to see if there are any cameras there, all that stuff can be put up there, no problem, and that is one of the things that we do during the event setup or the product setup for this thing. So we've talked about how we set everything up. And the really nice part is once the people start registering for this, we actually do get to see their locations on here. And let's imagine I wanted to know about this gray dot here. And the dots are color coded if you look at the top of the screen. So this gray one's a motor coach. If I wanted to see who that motor coach was, I can see the phone number there, and I can see when their location was last pulled, which I did this a while ago for setup, so it's a little stale right now. But those can always be updated by requesting all vehicle locations as we go through too. The other nice part here is that I can interactively message everybody here, and this is where the two-way communication side that Rick mentioned comes in. And I have lots of options. I can simply select all of my users. I can do just cars, trucks, school buses, and these categories should look familiar because these are derived from the different groups you were able to select when you registered for the event as a user who was stuck on a road somewhere. So when you picked that, those were the choices that we give you here. So if another place wanted some option that was not on here, that's a very simple thing to do. Now, we also have a function for new users, and this is one of the lessons learned we had. In some cases, the queue builds, as I was kind of saying before, and the agency may have launched this and sent out a couple messages already, but then somebody comes in who hasn't received any messages yet. And for that, we post the history on the website, but we can also select just the users that haven't been contacted yet when we do this. I can say I want to compose a message to them, and I'm going to say, hi, welcome to the trapped queue. And if you notice when I type that, it typed twice. That's because you can send it with text messages and to the IVR phone system, as some people might choose. And this is in case you do something in the text message system with your limited characters where you're going to want to, spell out YOU versus the letter U or L8R to later as a difference between your text message and your phone system message. You also have the option here to make this message get added to the website or not, because I can make that communication private, just one-on-one or one to whatever that group is I want, or to everybody in the world so that they can see it in the history. Now, as I click send here, it's going to make sure I'm really sure. And because this is a live working demonstration, fortunately, you're all muted, but otherwise we should be hearing a bunch of text message things go off. And if anybody selected the phone option, they should be getting a call momentarily from the IVR system. Now, if I want to know if anybody did choose the phone option, I can look at my statistics here on the user group that we're dealing with, because everything here is sortable. As I click it, I see that my top and my bottom are text message, so nobody decided the phone option, and that's actually pretty reflective of real life in the roughly 27 activations we've had so far for the system. We've had very, very, very few people sign up for the IVR system. But it's good to see there. You can also see who's inside the zone, who's out, and whose location the phone wasn't being too friendly providing. And basically anything else that you decide to ask in your survey, we can pop into this. And as I go and I refresh my screen, I will also see the history for everybody that I've contacted. So I'm going to go back to one. This is my phone number, actually. I can look here because I've been sending myself messages for a while. And I can see that I've got a bunch of previous messages on here that were going back and forth. And I can actually see messages that came in from that number at that point as well. And they just wind up looking like they're in a different color. So let's see. On my checklist, what else did I miss here? We did the robocalls. I guess this is also a good point where I can say that this screen that we're looking at right now is the two-way side of the communication, because we can send the messages out and we can look at messages coming in. We also have a view where you can just see all messages going out and coming in that we'll look at very quickly here, just so you can see what it looks like. Where we see somebody wants snacks, those are messages coming in. The yellow ones are the messages that I was sending out. And so it's a very easy way to manage it here, and I can also send back a message just to that person. I'll tell it to compose and say, too bad. We didn't really like that person anyway. No, just kidding. We're a wonderful DOT that is nothing but humanitarian. But the important part is that's the two-way communication portion of it. We also can do this as a one-way communication portion where we can just send out that wireless emergency alert without having this two-way interaction. And here's where I get back to that story I promised you a minute ago. Last summer, the Pennsylvania Turnpike, at somewhere in the neighborhood of noon or 1 o'clock on a Friday afternoon, in doing a routine bridge inspection, found that the connector bridge between the Pennsylvania and New Jersey Turnpikes had a crack in it that was so significant they could not let traffic on it anymore, and they had to shut down the bridge. Now, the Turnpike's very good at managing this, so there was no traffic queue in Pennsylvania, but what they did want to do was send an alert going up the Turnpike, warning people that A, there was going to be traffic where people were being forced off, and B, to avoid the area if you could. So what they did was they were using this system to just send out that WIA blast to say, hey, bridge is closed, avoid the area. And it actually wound up helping to mitigate some of the problems that they would wind up having hit earlier. And if you go back to the diagram Rick was showing earlier about the anatomy of the accident, that's the kind of situation where you can send it to people that are a little further upstream and catch them at that point. Now, as I shift back to my slides here, the next thing I want to highlight is that we have this after-action reporting. But before I get into the details of an after-action report, when you signed up in that website and you consented to be part of this incident, you basically said, yes, you can have permission to know my text message, to know my phone number, to text message me, to all the data plan stuff, and to get my location, because you're giving your consent to get the location as well. Now, that data can be sensitive. And so as part of the way the system is designed, and the services are on here, and the agreements with the carriers and things like that, once this incident is closed, all data is anonymized. And I can't stress that enough. What we do retain is that there was a car or truck or whatever it was at this point at this time. There is no phone number or history associated with that, so all we know is that someone was there. What that allows the agencies to do is have this nice summary report and essentially reconstruct what happened without getting anybody's individual privacy concerns overhauled. And I can tell you from having gone through this, it's really true. We really do not know what number was at what position or exactly sending what message. What we do log, however, is on the agency side, anything the agency user does is logged, however. So we can find out that if we see on here that it's 7:44 and 43 seconds p.m., or 1944 as we would say in the military, somebody sent this message out and you want to know which operator did so, we are tracking that. Same thing if we're doing approvals for the system for the to go out as a wireless emergency alert. The person who requested it and the person from the emergency management agency who approved it are both recorded in there and logged as it goes through, so that we can kind of keep track of who's doing what from the agency side. But from the traveler side, it winds up being anonymous. Now, what I like about this after action report is not only do we get all our summary numbers for the things that happened and the people that registered and our list of messages, but we also get a picture of the map within a certain distance of the queue. Now, when I look at that map, you might be thinking, well, what I was first thinking, and what you're probably thinking at this point is, John, a lot of those people are right there in the queue, and that's the majority of them. But what about some of these people that are hanging out way up here or way over here? Well, it's impossible for me to tell you exactly what they are, but one of the things that we have found is that those are often people in other places who are monitoring the closure. In some cases, that's as simple as the DOT. So when there's an alert in Pennsylvania, you'll almost always have a bunch of people wherever they are in the traffic queue, and you always have a handful of dots that are plotted in Harrisburg. I bet you can guess who those dots are. There's also usually people from media companies that might be monitoring it, so the news can do it, and they can be taking the information from here, which is really nice because it's not getting filtered through anybody else like social media. This is coming directly from you as the agency. So the news can actually pull the messages that are going to the passengers as well, or at least the ones that you decide are available to them. And then in other cases, we've also seen where somebody is monitoring somebody else. So for instance, let's say that you're an adult, you're an empty nester, and you have some kids that are in college, and one of your college kids is trapped in this queue. Well, the queue might be in Pennsylvania, you might be in New York. You can actually sign up to receive the alert still, so you can get the updates when your child is getting the updates, so that you can kind of monitor the situation and hopefully have a little bit more peace of mind knowing that A, the position of that car is known by the agency and the authorities, and B, that you see that there's a response coming to it because you're seeing that information come down saying, hey, yes, we know you're there, we know there's a problem, and we're working to resolve it right now. And if you're really getting close, maybe even an anticipated time that the road's going to be open again. Now, I know I went through that kind of fast, but let me tell you, there is a lot of background, especially on the Pennsylvania side for when we're putting that together. There's, of course, deciding, the different functionality that everybody wanted, but I also want to stress that there was a lot that Rick kind of mentioned earlier, a lot of procedural stuff that went in because there's the tool and using the tool, but because there was coordination between the DOT, the Turnpike, the emergency management folks, and the state police, they had to know when this thing was going to go live. And when they put the framework together, their initial reaction said, all right, this is going to be very important, but we want to make sure that we're using it only when it's really necessary and we're not overloading people. And we want to make sure it's an assistance portion too. So they said, 4 hours became their window. What they started finding in real life was that the 4-hour window turned out to be a little bit long. And this is one of many lessons learned we've had from this. And that, of course, when we sit one-on-one with an agency, we can get into these in more detail on how they'd apply to you. But basically, people want to know the information a little faster than that. And as long as the queue is going to be going on for an extended period of time, they'll now often activate this system before the 4-hour mark if they think it's going to last longer, so that they can at least get something out to folks before they start getting too antsy with what they're doing. So what I'm trying to say here is that Pennsylvania went through the process of setting up the procedures, and they also went through the process of the time of development of the system, and you as an agency get the benefit of cutting that down by a whole lot for a really quick setup on both ends, because we can share with you these lessons learned on the procedural side, and we've also already taken care of the technical side, obviously, with what's working here right now. So what did that all lead to? Well, looking at these procedures and these policies, Pennsylvania came up with the thought that this system was really only going to be used once, maybe twice every year or two, because the criteria for that really started creeping up to be something pretty high. And that's fine. If it's used once or twice a year, those people who are trapped in that queue will tell you that is going to be a great benefit to know that they are being monitored and somebody's tracking them and making sure that they're okay. But as it turns out, it gets used a whole lot more when it's a tool at your disposal, and you realize that there are a lot more situations than you expect where this stuff comes up. So Rick mentioned a bad day in February in Pennsylvania where he had some of that data about some really long trapped queues. Well, this is a screenshot from the system on the right, and every one of these flags that's up was a different trapped queue. And in this screenshot, I know you can see 3. There were actually 4 simultaneous events going on that day in February. So it went from looking at it once or twice a year to 4 at the same time one day. And obviously that's a big sign in terms of how the system has been accepted and embraced by the Pennsylvania agencies, and we're really happy that they've been so pleased with it. They've actually, in a year and a half, activated it 27 full times, and this morning would have been 28, but they didn't want to make it live. And they've reached a lot of people, as you can see from the numbers here. Almost 10,000 people in those vehicles who end up getting some messages from folks. And the nice part is that it says 62,000 text messages were sent by the agency. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, how can I possibly have enough staff to send 62,000 text messages? And the answer is that hopefully you saw from the quick demonstration with the message, with one button click, I can send that to 50 people, I can send it to 200 people, I can send it to 1,000 people. And the system really takes care of all the effort there so that you're getting it all out in kind of one fell swoop without really having to worry about every individual conversation. Now, you can monitor every conversation, but generally it seems that it's been used more to either seek out trends or to really push messages with updates from the agency on kind of a mass level. I also want to point out that the way help is being offered through this partnership, it's an all-you-can-eat system. So you don't have to worry about the number of times you activate it. You don't have to worry about the number of text messages or IVR minutes you're using, none of that stuff. It's simply just a fee that you wind up paying, a setup and then a monthly, and then you can use it as much or as little as you want. And we really have been happy encouraging agencies like Pennsylvania to do that as frequently as possible. Now, the one other spot that I really want to hit before I turn this back over to Rick is the onboarding process. And hopefully this will answer some questions that are coming up in your head already. It's a really simple process to get this up and running at this point. The first thing you're going to need is the name for the system, which is pretty straightforward. Sure, I guess you call it help if you want, but in Pennsylvania, as Rick mentioned, it's 511 PA Connect, and that's kind of their version of it. And then, of course, making sure that you have a URL that's available is also a fun process. I've gone through some pretty creative spellings to get URLs to work before in some other projects. The next part is going to be basically how you want the default portions of the wording to go and some of the initial survey questions. This is the kind of stuff that we'll be giving you a lot of samples from what Pennsylvania's done and from other experiences that we've seen with that. And that's a really pretty straightforward process where you can more or less approve or create your own kind of as much or as little as you want to put into that. The stuff with Pennsylvania works very well, and we have other sample questions and messages they put into. Probably the one part that requires more coordination than any of the others is getting the emergency management folks involved in this, especially if this is coming from the DOT. There is a certificate that they have to wind up getting over to us that we upload into the system, and then that's what gives the permission to upload the messages to the wireless alerts that get out to everybody. And then get some policies together, which again, we would very much help you draft and have some samples for you. And then staff training. I've done staff training just over the phone. We've done it WebEx, we've done it in person. We've done it at weird hours so that we can catch shifts changing over that do 24-hour operations. The training's generally speaking very quick and easy. And I'm talking to you right now and showing you this stuff, but when we do training, it's the operator's hands-on doing it because we always provide everybody with the live system to use as well as a demonstration system just for them to test on so that they can do all the practice they want in their off time as well. So what I'm going to do now is I will turn this back over to Rick so that he can wrap things up and go over to the question and answer session. So Rick, hopefully you are seeing the power come back to you.
I think I can take power too. So let me just do that. I have taken power. Give me a second here. Okay. You see my screen, John?
Yes, sir.
Okay, terrific. All right, so we're going to hit the part here is to just have a couple summary slides. And we have one question already in the chat box. You may all want to start. Those of you who hung on through the call, feel free to start typing questions and we'll begin to address. I think most of this is self-evident, and John, thank you very much. The demonstration is always a terrific way of illustrating just what we're talking about. It's a pretty simple concept. As John says, there's a lot of pedaling going on in the background to create it and maintain it. There's a lot of hard work that went on with coordinating with FEMA and the carriers that is not necessarily evident now, but is usually beneficial. But again, point being that this is a system that can be used to hit the most folks with an official message anywhere in the system, where in particular where dangerous situations where other approaches are going to be very challenging as far as getting communications. And then obviously this also has the ability of two-way communication. And then being able to interact with folks in the queue allows you better situational awareness overall, both kind of the anonymous registration and then the one-on-one communication. We're really excited about the ability to tie the data in with the service. Originally in Pennsylvania, PennDOT and the Turnpike would see our data on our systems or on their ATMS systems, and now that's being integrated fully in the information logistics interface and so forth. Now, the conclusion slide, and I see there's a few questions, which is great. Again, all this should have been said. Help is white label. Name it whatever you want. but it's available for use. The benefit here is that PennDOT, Penn Turnpike, Emergency Management Agency, Information Logistics now have about 2 years of development and School of Hard Knocks experience, and several activations that the system has evolved and improved, and lessons learned available to you. It's immediately available for licensing. System exists. John showed you a polygon in New Jersey. Only thing that would keep that from becoming a live service in New Jersey is getting the right code from the Emergency Management Agency. Then obviously you want training and procedures, et cetera, but the system itself works. The model here is, as John also mentioned, is a subscription licensing model, startup fee and ongoing costs. It's all turnkey, cloud-based, and once we kind of get the startup elements set up with the agencies, then it's yours to use. The rules associated with how and when you use it, what you use it for, those are up to you. And you don't necessarily need any outside services for successful use. Again, the FEMA and carrier coordination not to be diminished. And as I mentioned earlier, the new FCC rules demanding better precision by the carriers, we think is just going to open up even more viable uses for this ongoing service. So, okay, so with that, we have a couple of questions so far that we have typed in the chat box that related to the kind of the system and the service. And John, I'll ask the question, and in most cases, I think it'll be for you guys to answer. First question is, how does PA differentiate between 911 calls and regular motorist calls for service, like flat tire, water needed, etc.? Are there two links, one for emergency service assistance and one for general motorist assistance?
Yeah, this is a really nice question, actually, and it was one of the big concerns when we were setting this up in Pennsylvania. And basically, the short version of the answer is, hopefully, whoever asked this actually registered and received the message that I sent out, because appended to the end of every message that comes out of the system from the operator says, call 911 in case of emergencies. So there's not two links. What they've done is they basically made sure the 911 advertising is pretty consistent throughout so that people do not mistake it for an emergency response system. Now, I'll also say that as a backup procedure, Pennsylvania's put in place that if somebody types in the word help, even if it's really just to get terms and conditions, what they do is they respond and say, are you okay? Now, we also found out from PennDOT that this did have an interesting side effect. There have been no complaints so far about anybody using this in place of 911 by any means, which was a concern, but I think it was advertised well that it shouldn't be. But then at the same time, their 911 call centers have actually seen a reduction in volume around these incidents when they occur, because the 911 centers were getting so many non-emergency calls at the time that the call takers were starting to get flooded in the area around the trapped queue. And they've actually seen that go down. And anecdotally, we've also heard that in the operations center, the phones don't ring nearly so much with people calling in who can figure out what that number is and say what's going on.
Great, thanks. The next question we have is the interaction setup flow easy for people who are driving in hands-free mode?
So this one's pretty straightforward. The alert with the two-way side of this is designed for people who are stuck on the road and not in hands-free mode, because they shouldn't be driving if they're trapped in a trapped queue. And in no way would we recommend anybody try to do anything with that while they're actually driving. We wouldn't recommend anybody navigate to a website at that point. The people that are expected to do that are the ones that are stuck on the road, or who come in and then are stuck on the road after, a couple seconds after they get that message. The wireless alert for the warning side that we talked about, like in the example of the Pennsylvania Turnpike, all that is that's just the emergency alert blast, which I know in my car, which is a 2016 Toyota, it'll actually read those alerts to me as well. I never have to do anything outside of my hands-free mode. So the warning alerts do come through that way. It's only through stops that you would actually be expected to do a two-way interaction or register on the website.
Okay. All right, folks. We may have done a good job here, John. 2 substance questions. Are there any others? We're here. We've got up to another 15 minutes. If anybody has any question, again, I'd like to think most of this is self-explanatory. There's probably many of you agency folks may be thinking, yeah, but how would this work in my area? Yeah, but, that's great. We're happy to have that engagement. Again, I think the important part about all this is the plumbing is set up to work anywhere in the country. The procedures about how to do so are designed to be left up to the agencies in charge there. None of this stuff is hardwired. The 4-hour rule isn't hardwired. What you use it for, what you don't, isn't hardwired. How many agencies are involved, the process that gets you to, that's all up to you. So maybe that's self-explanatory. We can certainly have engagement. And obviously demos or any more in-depth discussion, reach out to John or myself. My email is rick@inrix.com. I realized putting all this stuff together and we're focused on the demo. I didn't put the last slide that has our email addresses, but if you email me at rick@inrix.com and indicate help interest, and we'll obviously we'll be sending out the link to the recording and the PDF for this. So and in that we'll provide more information on how to connect with us and engage with us. So last call for questions. John, is there anything else you wish to point out?
I don't think so, Rick. Thank you, everybody. This has been great. I appreciate all your time. And Rick, I certainly appreciate all your moderating and setup here.
Sure thing. And for those of you still on the call, as you know, I know several of you by name that are attending. A lot of us have been at this for years, if not decades. A lot of the things we do help the day-to-day traveler. I'm extraordinarily excited about being able to offer this service because, again, from Hurricane Gustav evacuation in 2008, maybe not something you all remember, but it was the first evacuation of New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. I was able to see on one of our initial demonstration sites back in 2008, this is before Google had traffic and things like that, I was able to see evacuation information live, on interstates that would be considered in the middle of nowhere. That's 10 years ago now, so now it's old hat. But just being able to see and think through the ability, this is when these kind of services are really needed. Lives are at stake. People are paying attention. Agencies' reputations are on the line. The ability to handle these incidents now in a much better fashion. To me, this is incredibly exciting. We're proud and privileged to be a part of it, and we look forward to working with the Farrells, Information Logistics, and you all to broaden this service beyond Pennsylvania. And with that, I see no other questions. So we'll close here a few minutes early. Thank everybody for their time. And again, you'll be seeing an email with a presentation and a link to the recording. Please feel free to pass that along to any of your colleagues who you feel both within your state, within your agency, within other key agencies in your state, or other state colleagues you think in other states who would benefit from this. And we look forward to helping bring this service live across the country here in the coming weeks and months. Thank you.